So what I'm going to talk about today is Filecoin's current status and priorities. We're going to talk through a set of needs, gaps, and upgrade path possibilities. And this hour is going to be to build a shared perspective ahead of the next few days. So we're going to look at a lot of things. We're going to recap Filecoin in 2024. We're going to review network metrics. We're going to talk about product market fit. We're going to look at the storage lifecycle. We're going to talk a little bit about computer over data, the dev environment, and network funding. So FDS has been tremendously successful so far. Over the it's only been about a year, right? A little bit over a year, and so much stuff has come out of FDS so far. It's been amazing to see the range of new ideas, new projects, new things that people have been building. It's been super, super successful. And that success comes from shared alignment on problems, challenges, opportunities, priorities, roadmaps, the things to build. So this summit is to enable us to come together as a wider community, figure out what is important to solve, do as much as we can here, and then set ourselves up to execute independently between now and next Philadelphia Summit, right? So the coordination that we can have here together is just very different than the coordination we can have when we're separated. So today, the next couple of days, are the moment to discuss very large, hard things to then be able to execute independently. So in order to do that, we need to review and align on what's going on. We need to use data, what's working, what's not working, what problems we can solve together, and our roadmap for the next few quarters. We're going to do that in this session. So in this hour, we're going to do this bird's eye view over a lot of things. Then we're going to have a workshop where we're going to work together through this, and we're going to discuss and prioritize. And then later today, we're going to have the PMF track where we're going to dive deeper into a range of things. And we do this because Filecoin is a very large and complex system. There's a lot of pieces. And so it really helps to be able to look at it together and discuss it. So let's start at the very top. Filecoin is a crypto-powered storage network. The mission of Filecoin is to create a decentralized, efficient, and robust foundation for humanity's information. We've been mostly operating on this rough master plan where step one was to build the world's largest decentralized storage network. We passed that with flying colors fairly quickly. It only took us a few years to scale out a massive, massive scale network. Right now, most of the ecosystem is focused on onboarding huge amounts of data to be able to safeguard it into the network. And a small fraction of the ecosystem is focused on bringing compute to the data to unlock a whole bunch of applications. So really, step two here is where a lot of us are focused and where a lot of the product market fit questions will come from. So this is a view into the economy of Filecoin and Filecoin businesses. Raise your hand if these diagrams are familiar to you. About half. Okay, cool. So I'll plug some talks that we had at prior FDS summits for you to go look at it in detail. I'll describe a little bit together. So in the bottom left, you can see the Filecoin economy. You can think about it in 4 broad components. You can think of the internal business of a particular network. So think of, this is like the traditional normal economy style transaction processing. The bottom left is about consumption. So when you're literally spending Filecoin, this is modeled as the burn. Then there's exports and imports. Exports are when Filecoin is able to sell some service to the rest of the world and exchange some other form of currency for fill. And imports when fill is traded the other direction to be able to pay for OPEX, CAPEX, and so on. So Filecoin economic success depends on having a lot of internal business over time and selling way more than we import, right? We want the exports to be higher than the imports. And today, we need metrics on this, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, but a lot of the problems around Filecoin stem from these measures being out of balance. On the top left, we have various different businesses. I'll dive into this a little bit more. And you can think of the Filecoin economy as embedded in a space with a lot of other economies that we're trying to sell this service to be able to grab some of the cash flows from those other economies. So a lot of the priorities for the last year have been around greatly reducing network costs. So this goes into reducing SP costs, bringing in new funding for various network businesses, be able to more efficiently fund the OPEX directly in fill, also increasing the exports, meaning increasing paid adoption, making reliable retrievals so that clients are able to use the data, easier and better storage on-ramps, paying deals, and so on. And then once there are applications on the network itself, then we want to focus on enabling the growth of those applications, bring in different kinds of L2 networks, and increase the amount of on-chain transactions and payments. By the way, I want to cover a lot of ground, but I also want to kind of make it kind of interactive. So between each section, I'm going to pause for some questions. These were the broad network goals that we've talked about in 2024. Again, reducing network-wide OpEx, make reliable retrieval, make storage simpler, faster, and more reliable, onboard paying users, build high-value applications, and build high-value compute-heavy networks. I think we should, at some point, grade these while we're here together. I think we've done a really good amount of work on a set of these. Other ones are less good, and so it would be really useful as a group to grade how we're doing. One really key thing, though, and I think not everyone's fully aware of this. The Filecoin network is the broad strategy right now is to be able to build a lot of services on top of the Filecoin network through different applications or L2s. Meaning, Filecoin is a very large platform that supports many different kinds of use cases, and you can't tune a platform that general for just one specific use case without sacrificing a lot. So the goal is to be able to support lots of different teams building out specific products for specific use cases as L2s or applications on top of Filecoin. Cool. So that was just a quick recap. Any questions on this section? So I'll do 1 or 2 minutes on questions. Yeah. Danny.
So I've heard some sort of disagreement, and I saw it sort of name-checked in your thing about whether we should be competing on price against existing system. So in this phase, are we competing on price, or are we competing on features?
Great question. Let's see. It depends on the market. So think of these broad markets. There's the traditional Web 2 world, and then there's the Web 3 world. The Web 3 storage is very small comparatively. It's just 10. It'd be surprising if it's hit 10 petabytes. It's growing a lot faster this year than it was last year, and it is going to grow much faster in the future. But the Web 3 market is where you can charge a premium, where today you offer features that can be a premium to customers. The rest of the markets have so many features that when people look at Filecoin, it's just a product that cannot compete in terms of feature scale. And so the dominant thing that people go for is cost reduction. This is a standard thing in new computing paradigms. The way that new computing paradigms tend to get installed is that you have new paradigms coming in and offering two things. New features that the other players just can't easily provide, but that is not sufficient. You also need a massive cost reduction, usually somewhere between a 5 to 10 or 20x cost reduction. That's what can install new paradigms. That's how the cloud got built. If we can't do this, then we cannot displace the existing centralized platforms. And so, again, it really depends on the market. So for Web 3, you can totally charge a premium. For Web 2, you can't really charge a premium. And if you disagree with that, go prove me wrong. Go and sell 100 petabytes of storage at a premium on top of S3, and then tell me how I'm so wrong about that. I would love for you to do that. That would be, first of all, that would be amazing, great. But I just don't think that can be done at massive scale without some other weird notions of value on the side. So I think if you're just talking about competing directly in the market, you have to follow the traditional path of installing new paradigms, which is that in order to be the centralized cloud, we first have to compete on cost, get broad installation, and then at some point, maybe you can charge a premium for features. Does that make sense? And by the way, we'll have plenty of time to discuss this kind of thing later on, either today or in the next couple of days, if people kind of disagree on that point. Cool. Any other questions for this one? One more. Cool. All right. Everyone agrees? Awesome. I doubt it, but all right. Let's look at let's review network metrics. So first off, huge thanks to the folks that build and maintain metrics. This is an absolutely critical thing in the network. Today, our network spends so much time and effort talking about things, and usually when we talk about things, we refer to anecdotes and not data. And in the areas where we can talk about data, we see great improvement very quickly. Anecdotes often warp reality, So you really want to be able to look at data. So again, thanks to the folks that are building data, we're going to look at some areas where we need to build more stuff. Cool. So let's dispel some myths. This is the storage onboarding of the network over the last year. So look at that. It's surprisingly stable. This was surprising to me. This is 3 petabytes a day being onboarded every day for about the last year, the average. Everyone's like, oh man, the network is shrinking. Yeah, the capacity, the empty useless capacity is rolling off, and SPs are primarily focused on this. The QAP, this is also very surprising. The QAP is sustaining around 23 exabytes. For the last year, it's been hovering around that scale, which is pretty interesting. It means that the best explanation I have, I don't have a good way of validating right now, but the best explanation I have is that there's just a fixed amount of capital that wants to be mining, and that roughly corresponds to that 23 exabytes. Again, the NT capacity is shrinking to catch up to meet the rising size. So yeah, the capacity is shrinking a lot, but the QAP over time just keeps growing. And the network utilization is getting to 30% naturally because the capacity is shrinking. This is growing at a slower pace, and so we're just past 30%. So some takeaways. The Fill Plus incentive is working to get SPs to store data. So SPs have fully moved to focusing on verified deals. And QAP is continuing to grow over time. Let's look at the whole network over the entire history. So not just the first year. Let's look at the all-time history. So these are 2 very interesting periods. In 2021, we reached about 50 to 60 petabytes a day of CC onboarding, and those were like the good old days, right? When like people were mining as fast as possible. Note that in 2023, we actually got really close to that again in QAP, not in CC, but in QAP. So this is weighed by QAP. And today, we're only about half of the all-time high. So people tend to think of it as like, oh, the onboarding is just so small relative to 2029. That is not true. We're just a factor of 2 off. So we can totally do that fairly quickly. Now, when you think about circulating supply, you can see the direct effect in those time periods. In this period, there was a lot less fill in the network, so a smaller amount of onboarding increase had a much bigger impact. There's less of an impact now per petabyte onboarded, but this really means getting to 6 to 10 petabytes a day, which is only a 2 or 3x increase from where we are today. It can be massively transformative to the economy. There's a lot more achievable and approachable than maybe what most people think. Most people think it's like, oh man, 10 to 20x away. And it's like, no, it's just 2 to 3x. Data onboarding. So this is the last year of data onboarding, and this is the new deals with snap deals. One interesting data point, snapping is happening, but it's only a small percentage. So there's a few SPs that are doing a lot of snapping, but it's only a small percentage. So that means that most of the data is still prepped ahead of time before being sealed, which implies certain things about how parties are storing the data, implies certain things about the type of data, and so on. So now, how much data is coming from each user? How much data is coming from each region, from each use case, from each on-ramp? I don't know. We don't have the dashboards. We have the data, so we can have a bunch of tables everywhere, but we don't have a dashboard, so we can't actually together reason about this. And so one of the key things I want you to do, and one of the things I'm going to drive a lot of folks to do in the next few days, is figuring out what graphs are we missing so that we can build them between now and next FDS, and we can make dramatically better decisions. So we need this, right? Because a lot of our conversations will be like, oh, well, what about this use case or that use case or this other possibility? It's like, well, show me the data. How legit is this use case? And on-ramps, especially to support problems for on-ramps, we're going to need to be able to look at the data that shows certain on-ramps operating at certain scale. Fill Plus stats. So we've had a revamp on the stats for Fill Plus. Some of these are the new graphs. Here, the top left is the retrieval compliance. So you can see SPs that are starting to get measured, starting to increase the retrievability of the data. It's still a small fraction relative to the whole network, but that's growing, and that's without incentives so far. So the moment that this gets wired up to incentives, you should expect that the green segment will expand quite a bit. You can see kind of breakdowns by country. We don't yet have the full view. Like for Phil Plus, I want something connected to the data very directly where you can say how much of the data is compliant versus not relative to our measures of compliance. And where we can see what are all of the measures of compliance that we have so we can add new measures over time so that everyone in this room can quickly say, oh, these are the specific compliance components. Here's how we add new ones. Cool. Here's like one really cool success from that crew. Data retrieval, I mentioned it before, is improving. As soon as we started measuring the retrievability and we had an easy way to enable SPs to diagnose and problem solve and so on, and a lot of people spending time with them to fix it, you can see retrieval success rate across the entire network now getting to 12%, and the non-zero miners in that graph getting to over 58%. So that's a really cool success. This is awesome, and this is without incentives. When we connect it to incentives, you should expect this to go pretty fast. So big takeaways: measuring retrieval success rate is greatly improving retrieval already. There's steady improvement week over week. Connected to incentives to speed it up, and keep going. Let's keep applying this to a bunch of other things that we need to measure, that we need to orient for how the network needs to behave. Yeah. What is the exact definition? I don't want to
They've got a 0% retrieval success rate if they've never served a single retrieval. And that's kind of miners who just haven't even bothered to think about retrieval at all. But as soon as they've served at least one retrieval, then they're into that non-miner category. So they might have a very low retrieval success rate with like 1% still, but it's just non-zero.
I have a question. If the what's our target for the retrieval success rate via Spark? What are we aiming for us to consider that retrievals are something that are working more broadly?
So we need to be able to tag the deals that don't want retrieval testing specifically. There's only a very small minority of deals where that is a legitimate need from the client. Outside of that, 100%. Or 99.999. Because look, if you have a file system where you put data and it doesn't give it back to you, I've got a way cheaper file system for you. It's called PyFS or like DevNullFS. That's a great file system, very cheap. We'll take all your data, never give it back to you. So we really need, so again, if a client specifically says, I do not want my data tested, that's one thing. Outside of that, the retrievability should be good. Cool. Let's talk about the economy. In this economy, how many transactions are happening within the economy right now? We have a view into some of it in the chain, but we don't have a notion of the biggest fraction of the value, which is all of the storage deals. We don't have any of that visibility. So we need to be able to build the tooling to be able to see all of the operations and transactions around the storage market directly on chain. What's the GDP of the Falcon network? We don't know. We don't have the data nor the graphs. Here's where we need to get the data so that we can then make the graphs. How much are we selling as a whole network? Does anyone know? Whoops. We got to figure that out. This is like freaking P0. Like we gotta figure this out. What about how much are we selling to each specific market? Well, we don't know how much we're selling it in total, so who knows about the specific markets? How much are we buying? What are the imports and OpEx? Like what are we as a network spending yearly to generate revenue? We can maybe approximate it, right? Like the data is maybe in the chains, is maybe in the token flows. We can probably bound it, but we don't have the metrics, and it'd be great to have the metrics. What are the network's largest costs and OpEx? People, hardware, bandwidth.
When you say network, what do you mean? Because I think
the whole network.
The costs will be very different if you start talking about what are the SP costs.
Yeah, I mean the whole network, including the entire integrated system of all of the organizations building Filecoin. So,
tell me that upset pieces of little data that will apply.
If 30% of our cost is in network traffic, that is a definite, clear target we can go after. And the commoditizing of the back-end infrastructure, we need to do a better job of working together to commoditize and bring Curio up to speed with these things that aren't direct value add to end users. The more we can minimize those things that are within our control, and everything that I just described is operational efficiency, the more we can drive that, the better the whole network will be.
You get what you measure. If we're not measuring the economy, we're not going to improve it. So takeaway, we need the data and we need these graphs. Cool. Core dev activity, we can see that. So this is over the lifetime. What's the graph here? This is from 2021 roughly to 2024. Less commits in 2024. I think that that's actually a set of repos are not being tracked. So this might be a bug in the data. But note that similar number of PRs are merged in 2024 versus 2023, which to me indicates that there's less noise overall. So there were a lot of issues with a bunch of noise that didn't translate into commits or PRs. And it would be great to have much better data in terms of like, what are devs focused on? Like what problems? How are we making progress against those roadmaps? It would be amazing to have burn down charts. Like if we had a network-wide roadmap and a burn down chart of how we're doing, like that would enable everybody to be like, oh yeah, great, we'll get this at this point in time. What about user development activity? How many devs are using Filecoin? How many devs are using Filecoin in hackathons? We can bound it, but we don't have like a graph, right? How many startups are building on Filecoin? Probably a few hundred, but we don't have a way to see it in a graph. What are the bounces? What are the common frictions? We don't have this. How many people are reading our docs? That would be pretty trivial to add today, to see like a graph of, who's looking at the docs. And that would give us a lot of picture. Yeah. Amazing. Are they visible to the whole network?
Yeah, I think some of them are on David's thing and some of them are on a dashboard that we had internally at the foundation that I've got a public version of.
Yeah, so thank you. What I would plug is that in order to cause this network-wide decision-making, if the dashboard is not on public data with a public dashboard that anyone can access, it doesn't exist. So let's get the data out in public. So takeaways. We have some of the data. We have some of the graphs. Some of them are private. Let's get this super public so we can all see it together, and then we can problem solve against it. And especially now that we have PGF tools, we can directly connect PGF funding to improvements in those metrics, which would be really awesome. Yeah.
So one of the really powerful things in this ecosystem is our push for open source and how often investment, things like that, is based around open source. One of the things I'm thinking about in the previous slide was when you have an ecosystem and you have GDP, right? One of the insights that a government has is taxes, right? They know they can ask people to reveal that information. Is there a way to incentivize the many commercial organizations that we have to not reveal their business plans, not to reveal those things, but to give us clues about this? And do we do that at the kind of investment level? What are the incentives that we could do to get people to be more open?
So the network together is using the block reward and spending it together to buy storage capacity and storage power in terms of data. And so together, we're spending all this money to get that capacity and that storage. And we don't have visibility into what we are getting as a network back from that. In fact, a lot of parties are selling that storage outside of the Filecoin economy. It's not improving the Filecoin economy. We'll talk about it later in terms of stablecoins. But we need to be able to have visibility over the entire storage market at scale on-chain. So we just need to move into a mode where the network just requires this. Yep.
Number one, it's really refreshing to hear that you're focused on all these network-wide metrics and measuring ourselves. Number two, as I participate in some of these discussions, I'm having a problem with the fundamental game theory, if you will, that would drive into profitability. It can either be a pull type activity by way of some kind of network-based rewards, or more importantly, in particular, with the proof of retrieval capabilities.
One of the things that we fall victim to is that there's a gentleman's agreement that, yes, we're going to be able to get your data. And there's also the implication that people are going to passively participate in these metrics. I would suggest that the passive participation is going to always be somewhat unreliable, but in the context of an established storage contract, having a third-party auditing function that leverages these tools is where it both pays for itself and renders value and safety and security to the end user. And I think you'll get much better data because you'll have more voluntary, motivated participation without consuming the rewards of the network.
Yeah, fully agree. So, and to be clear, in building blockchain systems, we're here to use math and cryptography and game theory to cause outcomes, not to hope, right? Not to just like try and maybe hope that people will do it out of the goodness of their hearts. We really need to make sure that the game theory is set correctly to cause these outcomes, and that we think carefully about what is the network spending to get what outcome. And sometimes markets can form and then you'll get good outcomes. But right now it hasn't, right? Like we don't have a lot of this data being reported by parties normally. So it has to come along with the storage deal flows. And just think about it, how to retune how the client brings data to the network, how data cap is awarded. All of those components can be retooled to connect to on-chain, on-ramp data, so you can actually see as a whole network where how these deals are working, where they're faulting, and so on. Because at the end of the day, the network is paying an enormous amount of money every year for that storage. And currently, we're not even getting the data of what's happening with that money. Like, think about it that way. Cool. I want to talk a little bit about economic loops briefly. So this is the broad Bitcoin economic loop. You have token rewards driving proof of work security. That gives this impression of decentralized store of value. That has been sold to the world as an alternative to fiat currency. That brings in more buying of Bitcoin, which increases the value of the token rewards. And this has a kind of virtuous loop as long as these arrows work. Now, if you think about Ethereum, it has that same loop. However, that loop is weak because in the broad world, it's difficult to compete on this decentralized store of value question. So while that Ethereum has that exact same structure, when it competes with Bitcoin on that in that area, it just isn't nearly as successful, and so that's weak. If Ethereum ever flipped Bitcoin, that could become strong now, but today that's weak. But Ethereum makes its value through these two other token reward flows. One is application spending gas, or ETH locked in applications in DeFi, L2s, and so on. And so those are the dominant token reward loops for Ethereum. So Filecoin has those same ones. However, application spending gas on Filecoin is a very weak one for us because other parties are not going to spend an enormous amount of time migrating out of other compute or smart contract-oriented networks to run on Filecoin. They're going to keep running wherever they are. We shouldn't compete on that. What we should compete on is storage clients buying storage in Filecoin. Like that's the bottom loop. We have an analogous TVL loop, and that's where users lock fill, including SPs for collateral and so on. But this isn't leading to a burn today, and so it's not as strong. It's just a lock and release, so it's not nearly as strong as in other cases, and it's just a very different scale than Ethereum and so on. And the core loop, which is storage clients buying and fill, is kind of broken right now. It's not really working today. But the parts of this loop that are working is that Fill Plus is giving required the cost reduction, so you can actually go out and sell petabytes of storage to customers. Like we've seen that happen where customers with massive scale data sets buy the storage in Filecoin. And you can totally store, because of the scale of the network, you can store normal Web3 data to your heart's content and replicate it massively and charge whatever premium you want. And like all of that is working fine. But what's not working is that most of those payments are not happening in the economy. All of that is happening in fiat outside of the economy and is not impacting Filecoin. So we're paying for all of that to happen, and that's happening outside, and so it's leaching value out of the network. And so we need a way for that to happen in the economy. Now, SPs and clients have a very clear problem with being able to price in a volatile asset. They need to be able to price it in fiat locally, and so that's where a stablecoin comes in. And you'll hear more later in this conversation and later in the day around why spending with a fill-backed stablecoin might be a way to flip this from not working to working, and really solve this problem, to be able to make sure that like all of that operation that's happening in fiat actually happens in the economy. The other thing is we're not selling storage fast enough. We're onboarding around 2 to 3 petabytes a day. A lot of that is public data, which is not really being sold. What fraction of that is being sold for large amounts of money today? We don't know. We need that data. But it's probably somewhere between a few hundred TIBs to a petabyte, if that. And so we need to grow that to 5 pips a day or beyond. The good news here is that we can totally undercut the rest of the market. You can give a 10x cost reduction. It's awesome. Like, it's super powerful. But the software tools to be able to do this today don't work well enough. Cool. Any questions on this so far?
Yeah.
This is like the bulk of the talk. The other stuff is going to go a little faster. Yeah.
Yeah, Juan. I'm still not sure. I think a lot of people are still not sure if the payment story needs to be on chain at all, which is why I think we need to start thinking about a demand source for fill, which is not related to paying for storage in fill. Because it's not like you can always pay off chain for deals. It doesn't have to be the fill token or even a stable coin backed by fill. So maybe like as part of the PMF, we should do some ideation around, can we think of other sources for fill demand? That is
what sources for ETH demand that is not directly connected to applications or the locking exist? Again, high volume. We're talking about billions in scale.
Other than speculation, the second is gas fees. Right. Block space demand.
Yeah, that's block space is the application spending on gas. Like these are the speculation speculates on a revenue flow. If you don't have that revenue flow, then you get no speculation. Like meme coins aside, sure you can have meme coins, and sure you can like add meme coin loops into these things. I don't think that's a real notion of value. I think that's entertainment value, but the scale is just very different. And so, not to say don't brainstorm new ideas. That sounds awesome. If you can come up with another loop here that is great, go for it. But what most of the network is tuned for is storing data and serving it to users. And like that's the core value prop of Filecoin, and we need to make money on that. If we don't make money on that, like what are we doing? Yeah.
Okay, I can have many microphones. Maybe a thing Arsh is flagging is, hey, there is a risk and an issue right now, which is this problem where things are not working, where this revenue flow is happening outside of the Filecoin network right now. And what that effectively looks like is that there's a double payment for the providers of that storage. The Filecoin network is paying them for a thing, and then the client is directly paying them in fiat under the table via their contract for a thing, and it's not hitting the Filecoin network. And that's a risk factor. It's the same thing that we saw with Grab drivers in Chiang Mai were doing all the time of like they show up and they're like, pay me cash instead of paying me through the Grab app.
It's not but it's not under the table, right? It's legit contracts and so on. It's legitimate business operations. The problem though is that legitimate business operation is happening outside of our economy. And so our economy is paying a huge fraction of that deal cost. And what are we getting in return?
For what it's worth, I have a talk later today exactly on why I will make a larger argument for like why on-chain pay deals. So also, if you're interested, plugging myself.
I would say yes, we need to bring more deals on chain so that these things can be we can take some value of this in our economy. But at the same time, like Ash is saying, there will always be an economy that is outside of the on-chain, as if the on-chain is, for example, it may be that on-chain will be there will be better markets, you will get a better price. But right now there's also something off-chain, and the question is, can we take a fee of the exchanges that are happening off-chain? And I have an idea that
protocol fees.
Talk about
you can introduce protocol fees.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is definitely more fees.
But introducing a protocol fee here, you can maybe rewrite storage clients buying storage and fill. A fraction of that gets paid in a protocol fee.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And gets burned.
Exactly. So there is space here for storage fee that can take off-chain transactions, some sort of...
The broad point that I'm making here is that this arrow today isn't working. We should get graphs here so that we can look at a graph by next PhilDev Summit and we can see how much money is the Filecoin network spending and how much revenue is the Filecoin network making. And today, that does not look good. Yeah.
The one thing to note, I think it's important, this slideshow is really helpful to understand what Filecoin needs. But I think, Arsh, for your question, that's what the customer needs. And it's kind of up to us to build tools that are so good that it would make no sense for those storage providers not to transact on chain. Like, just for example, if you chat with a few storage providers who are selling storage, a lot of them have reporting challenges. So they don't know which customer is paying what and what deals they have with different customers. And so just imagine building a QuickBooks on Filecoin for storage providers who are selling storage. And if you don't use the on-chain payment, it's just not going to show up. It's going to be a pain in the ass. Of course, you can interoperate with it or something like that. But that's where the product market fit conversations, I think, happen, is to flip the conversation from what we need to what they need and bridge that gap.
Yeah, and just to kind of like contribute to add to the stack here, I think there's new economic loops that can develop in presence of the new L2s that are emerging, that are adding functionality to Filecoin, such that besides kind of like launching their own crypto economy, they bind themselves as well somehow to the Phil economy, to the Filecoin itself, so that the services they're providing become the new standard. So as you have retrieval probing, as you have hot storage layers that can then take on the deals that are actually happening on chain, and they're automatically attaching these services to those deals. If this is happening and then Phil Plus comes in and kind of like leverages all of that new functionality to then continue attesting to the validity of those data sets that are stamped with Phil Plus, you kind of like create a whole new economic, like a whole loop, such that if you don't do this thing on chain, you won't benefit from all these downstream effects, right? And because these downstream effects have become the new normal, right? The new standard, you are basically forced to do them on chain, right? And that complemented by those tools that John was also mentioning, it's kind of like creates a whole stack where, that becomes the new normal.
Yeah. Finding better and stronger ways to either generate new economic loops that are strong enough, though that's, a challenge, that's a hard thing, and improving this arrow to make that arrow work and succeed. This is like some of the most important valuable stuff that people in the Filecoin ecosystem can really be working on. So, huge prior for us. Cool. So we have about 20 minutes left. So I'm gonna pick up the speed a little bit on this one. Most of the later sections are much shorter. This was the bulk of what I wanted to get through. This one is also a little bit long, but the other ones are a little bit shorter. Let's talk about product market fit for a bit. So we talked about new L2s going after different components. Let's talk about this in terms of markets for a second. And I'm going to describe 4 different markets. There are other ones that we could go for. I just really like these for specific reasons. Let's talk about Web 2 large-scale storage, Web 2 object storage, Web 3 object storage, and Web 3 chain storage. So Web 2 large-scale storage, this is large data clients. Web 2 object storage, think of Web 2 applications, S3, R2, that family of things. Web 3 object storage, think of applications, NFTs, and so on. And Web 3 chain storage, this is where you're helping back up entire blockchains or entire networks. So this is, the blockchains themselves, the deep-in networks, and so on. And the needs of these markets are similar, but substantially different, to the point where you really want to tune product market fit for each specific market, and the feature set that they require is different. So for example, in the large-scale storage, we have huge amounts of data, hundreds of exabytes to zettabytes. It's a pretty large market, 60 billion in scale now and growing pretty fast. Estimates by end of 2030, estimates for like 2030, 2032 are in the hundreds of billions per year. Clients store somewhere between 100 terabytes and an exabyte. Like, this is the scale, wide range of scale, but it's primarily very big stuff. This often requires a client and SP relationship because they need to know where the data is. They need to have paper contracts and so on. There's strong compliance guarantees. Often there's offline data transfer required because you're moving so much data you can't pipe it over the internet easily. And you often need to be compatible with common storage file systems. And so this is not just S3 APIs, though that's helpful, but other a whole range of other file systems that people need. And in terms of Filecoin, the model here is peer-to-peer, right? Like you create a marketplace for peer-to-peer transactions to operate. There's downsides and disadvantages with that model. Pools could exist here, on-ramps could exist here, but it's just trickier because you have to handhold in terms of the specific SP and the specific relationship in the specific data center. These are fairly slow writes. It's usually a huge onboard over time. You do this very large deployment, you set it up, and then you flip the switch on. Usually you have humans in contact along the way, and you're dealing with specific client organizations, right? So this is how a large fraction of the data on the network, most of the data on the network is coming from this kind of market because it's the biggest one by data volume. Let's talk about Web 2 object storage. This is like a medium amount of data. It's in the low exabytes. I'd be surprised if it's like 20 to 30 exabytes. You can use object storage interfaces to the big data, but that's qualitatively different than writing to buckets, the writing to S3 or writing to R2. This is, the data on this is very sparse because there aren't really good public numbers on this. Estimates out there say it's 10 billion, so it's a much smaller market. I'm not sure that that's accurate, but that's kind of what the internet says. Clients store somewhere between kilobytes to terabytes. So this is, you're doing lots of small writes into the network. Sometimes you might have some larger writes, but usually at that point you want to transfer them to a slightly different product. This often requires self-serve, SaaS products. You know, you have a software as a service type thing. You do not, if you're interacting or talking to anybody, you've already lost. Like that is not the product for that. You want a developer tool where the developer comes to the website, can try it, can use it, can go, never has to interact with a human. The S3 REST API is the gold standard of interop across the entire industry. Usually people need mutable buckets. That's, again, a structure pioneered by S3 that the rest of the industry has adopted. This is primarily online only. In some cases, you do have some offline interaction, but it's maybe it's for onboarding, not for onboarding large data sets, but in general, most of the updates are online. And usually you have fast retrieval, somewhere between 50 to 300 milliseconds. In the Filecoin model here, though, this is peer-to-pool. This is not peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer is never going to work here. You cannot try to interact and connect a random client to a random SP and broker a relationship. Never going to work. You need a pool structure where the client creates a relationship to an on-ramp, and that on-ramp then stores with relevant SPs. So this is, you know, a lot of the L2 applications like Web3 storage and Sriracha and Kave and Basin and so on, all of these work this way. Again, fairly fast writes and reads, fire and forget, and you deal directly with the application. So you don't deal with the end user, consumer of the product, you deal with the application developers. Web3 object storage. This is similar, way less data, less than 10 petabytes. It's a very small market, less than 100 million. Even if you charge a big premium, I'd be surprised if you can get 100 million out of Web3 object storage today. Clients store somewhere between kilobytes and gigabytes. Terabytes are still like, you know, too big. This often requires all of the standard requirements of Web2 object storage. It also requires verifiable storage, hash linking, CIDs, decentralized availability, on-chain read-write, and off-chain payments. And the model here is, again, peer-to-pool. And again, you deal with the application developers themselves. You don't deal with other parties. Now let's talk about chain storage. This is a small amount of data, relatively, but it's in the tens of petabytes, and soon will be larger. It's growing fairly quickly. It's also a small market. It's bigger, but it's also a small market. These are larger protocols with larger treasuries, so you can probably get to tens of millions per year, maybe hundreds. In the long term, in the 2, 4, 5, 10-year timescale, this could grow quite quickly. Clients store terabytes to petabytes, and this often requires Web2 object storage, CID verifiable storage, and so on, with the same kind of connection points. Something I forgot to write here is you need inter-network connectivity. You need automatic snapshotting and onboarding directly connected to the other network. So it's qualitatively very different. Sorry, I just forgot to like rewrite the requirements. The requirements here are quite different. You need to do what the Web3 object storage does, but on top of that, you need to connect automatic systems. You need to figure out a charging model that goes to the protocol. Oftentimes you have to go through like improvement proposals in that network and so on. And again, it's peer-to-pool. So today we don't have good pools, and that's part of the problem where we're not having product market fit here. So from my perspective, the first one is where there's an enormous amount of money and there's an enormous amount of data. And so we can succeed there as a network. A set of parties can go and succeed there, and that'll be super valuable. Object storage, there's less money, but it's where most of the applications get built. And so if you grow with a small application, those eventually translate into large-scale storage users. So it's a kind of like a loss leader type, not necessarily a loss leader, but like a leader for this bigger upsell market. Then you have Web3 object storage, which again is very small, but maybe if you win the hearts and minds of a lot of participants in the network, then you become part of the big conversation in Web3, and that has really good effects in the crypto ecosystem and crypto market. There's all kinds of second and third order effects that come from that. And then the third one is the last one is the chain storage. Has the same kind of features where it's a relatively small market. That's where developers are. But if you onboard an entire network, an entire chain, then it'll be a default thing that a lot of applications want to use. So it's a very good strategy for the ecosystem to go after that, because then you onboard entire networks at a time. And it's also growing pretty fast relative to the Web3 object storage. The chains themselves produce a lot of data. The DePIN networks are going to consume an enormous amount of data as well. And there's like high need for this. So let's talk about how to go after these. So let's talk about the Web 2 ones. So there's different, service classes that get defined for these. And you can think of, a whole host of applications out there that get built on top of these service classes. Each of these gets measured slightly differently. You need to be able to tune. And each of these classes has slightly different requirements. And so you need to tune the product for that. These look very different than the other ones. So when you think about object storage, you think about the vast majority of like little applications in Web3, tons of little objects. You want to again make it super easy for developers to use the content and use the network, but it's fairly different. Now Web3 chain storage, this is a new market in a sense. It sort of existed in the past, but most of the DePIN networks and AI networks and so on, and compute networks didn't exist 3 years ago. So a lot of this has gotten built over time. And this is growing quite a bit. So a lot of these are going to end up, some of these are going to end up getting product market fit. I would say a lot of these are going to die, but along the way, they're going to generate a lot of data and a lot of utility and can bring value to the network. So this is a increasingly a market that we need to pay attention to. So the way to go after them is that now you can't just like connect SPs to these markets. Like that's not how this works. You need layers in between. First off, you use the L1 chain to be able to interconnect and create a marketplace of storage providers to be able to interact with these groups. But then you need to tune the platform for that specific market. And that's where the L2 applications come in. I sort of thought of these here based on kind of what I know. I could be off here. So you tell me if this is off. But each individual application and group goes after a specific market. If an application or group wants to go after multiple here, like I just wouldn't bet on that, because you're now split, like you're just recreating the problem at the bottom layer again. You're then going to have to recreate little products for each one of these markets as well. And so the whole strategy of the network right now is to build the common components in the broad platform and enable and support separate products and service-oriented teams that go after each of these individual markets. If you win one market, then sure, you can then expand to other markets over time. But the groups that try to like take little slices of a bunch of markets are going to do the classic thing and just not end up serving any one of them well enough. One important note here, see where I drew the box. It's around the L2N applications, not underneath. This is going to cause a lot of confusion, so I want to talk about it here as a group. On-ramps like these that are providing a specific tuned version of storage for a use case are part of Filecoin. They're right to the L1, but they're part of building up Filecoin as a network. If you describe it as like separate from Filecoin or writing to Filecoin, then you're creating a different economic thing, and it gets less interconnected. There's been some good discussions over the past few weeks about creating strong economic links here, and I think this is a really good topic for this FieldDev Summit to figure out how to make the Filecoin network super valuable to all of the L2 and applications, in addition to being able to provide really cheap storage or verifiability proofs or liquidity and so on. There's all other kinds of components that could be linked together. This is an interesting crypto econ challenge for Crypto Econ Lab and other folks. But yeah, this is an important kind of nomenclature thing. So in order to get to PMF, each one of these markets, has a whole range of requirements in order to fit them. Small groups can't just go and succeed on all of these. We have to divide and conquer here, and we have to focus on a smaller, narrow set. These 4 are already a lot, right? Like you can imagine 10 other possible storage markets. I picked these because I think that these are some of the highest value, but the PMF discussion later is a good place to kind of talk more about these. All right, cool. I'm going to take like maybe one question on this because I got to move quickly through the rest. Yeah.
Just really quick, not really a question. I just want to flag that at the Hacker House, many of the teams like Akave were talking about how to address the marketing aspect and the branding aspect of saying Akave is Filecoin. So Akave, wherever you are, Megan, Danielle, you could talk to FF Marketing and Branding and Gary.
Cool. And I'll touch on this a little bit more during the PMF track. Cool, let's talk about storage lifecycle. This is an old diagram. We've upgraded it. We've gone from this to this. It's a little bit moved around because the storage on-ramps have rotated quite a bit. We moved out the indexers off to one side. It feels a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. But this is roughly how things work today. Storage clients store into the network through storage on-ramps and then retrieve through either those on-ramps themselves or some specific retrieval providers. And we use indexing to know where the data is and how to reason about it. And we use indexing also to be able to do various kinds of testing and compliance tools and so on. So yeah, this is the store flow and the retrieve flow. There's a whole range of storage service improvements. I won't go into detail here because folks have seen a lot of this and we'll talk about it in other places, but there's been a lot of focus on improving the storage service components during this year. There's also been a large focus in improving the retrieval story, and this is getting just dramatically better today than it was, say, a year ago. And when one of the key priorities now is starting to connect the retrieval story to incentives so that can drive strong compliance fully. And so great improvements on the storage flow, but this is roughly like what this looks like today. There's things that are kind of missing along the way, like graphs that we can't really tell how much data is going in particular directions. And so this is where figuring out specific graphs could be extremely useful to know what's going on, and building them the way that Spark has of being able to collect a bunch of data with station nodes and then being able to aggregate that and make it available on chain is a really, really good way of getting a bunch of data in this graph. There's also a lot of problems along the way, right? So there's problems across the storage lifecycle. And so one of the things that we need to do as a group during this Philip Summit is problem solve across these to find what are the ones that matter the most and how do we solve, how do we orient across these. We'll touch on this during the workshop later. Cool. I'll touch briefly on compute over data because that's a whole set of folks are focused on that and thinking about that, though it's a smaller fraction. So we've talked in the past about making Filecoin a very good L1 for L2 compute networks, as opposed to just building a specific Filecoin compute network. There's a lot of reasons for that. The main reason is that even if you had infinite resources and you were extremely good at doing this and so on, there are qualitative differences between how people want to store data in terms of verifiability and privacy that introduce huge trade-offs to performance, which means that a few years ago I looked at this and sort of predicted that we would end up with many different teams going after totally different technical solutions, which would lead to different markets and different approaches and different brands. And that's basically happened over the last few years. You've seen tons of different compute networks emerge. They do fairly different things. No one has yet tried to unify these. I predict that'll happen sometime in the next 3 to 5 years. Someone is going to try and give you the flavor of all of these by unifying them. Unclear if that's going to work or it's going to be inefficient. But the big reason why you end up with all of these different networks, it's just a technical difference in the trade-offs here between verifiability and privacy and performance. Users of Filecoin need computation on top of their data. That's a clear need. There will be many compute networks, and so that's why Filecoin should be a good L1 home. Remember also the data has gravity. Filecoin attracts compute networks. And compute networks bring utility to the data and generate more data. So if computation is run, you end up generating more data, which then causes more storage, and that increases the gravity, right? So coupling Filecoin to compute networks is a really valuable strategy because you end up generating an enormous amount of data, and that increases the network effect of the Filecoin network. So, and there's a lot of different modalities and technologies and so on. What we've done over the last few years is we've built and shipped FEM, we've built and shipped Bacalhau as a building block for compute networks, we've built and shipped IPC to enable scalable blockchains. There are some compute networks that have developed around Filecoin, so Bacalhau as a tool, Expanse as a company, Fluence, KubeHive, and Lilypad are specific networks that developed around Filecoin. There are some compute networks that developed separately and have approached Filecoin over time, so things like Jensen, Akash, Ionet, Kudos, Exabits, Tromero, and so on. Over time, we've invested really deeply in the relevant technologies, CK, FHE, TE, and so on. And there's a bunch of these networks. But overall, nothing works very well yet across the industry. This is not just like a Filecoin-specific problem. Across the entire decentralized compute industry, nothing quite works very well. Most compute networks have little to no demand. There's a few exceptions in some flows. But for the most part, there isn't good arbitrary task management yet. And we lack good integrations into Filecoin. So there's both an industry problem and a Filecoin connectivity problem. Filecoin itself needs compute for data prep. So we could become strong users of these networks and improve the flow of connectivity and become a user of these networks and help them succeed along the way. But just know that some of these compute networks will eventually get product market fit. And once they do, they're going to start growing very quickly. So we want to be a really good ground and promote interactivity and connectivity so that when they start growing, we grow along with them. And we don't, because it's going to be very difficult for a group that has massive PMF and growing to now switch their entire architecture to something else. So there's high value opportunities in 2025, but I wouldn't expect, maybe if AI agents really start taking off, you could see this in 2025. That would be probably the highest likelihood bet for generating an enormous amount of compute and data through decentralized compute networks in 2025. But my best guess is that this probably delays until 2026. So I would say we should optimistically push in these directions, but this is overall just a smaller focus for the whole network. One question.
Yeah. But what would be, most compute networks have little to no demand. What would be your take on why that is? It sounds like there should be a lot of demand given the world we are living in.
It's the classic Web3 deep-in problem. The systems are hard enough and complicated enough that teams spend most of their cognitive bandwidth building the thing and building the supply side. Then the crypto economics can build you the supply side very easily. You can scale it. It's complicated to build, but once you build it, you can scale it really fast. And there's no comparable game theoretic structure today for the demand side that actually works, that works well. And so you end up with these very lopsided networks that end up generating, that are hard to build, very big, and so on, end up generating a lot of supply. And when they go to meet demand, the products are just very different than what the rest of the market expects in the Web 2 world. Add on to that crypto has this, casino culture, over-financialization, speculation, and so on. And so it just ends up in a situation where normal customers of compute infrastructure have to go through this huge activation barrier and cognitive leap to try a Web 2 solution. And so that's why you need things like a big cost reduction and so on to get them over the fence. Compute is also different because of this privacy and verifiability thing. It's just a lot harder to meet the Web 2 requirements. When you tell people we're going to run your container in the clear and everyone's going to look at it, whoa, that's a totally different, that doesn't work, right? And so, and then when you say, okay, great, we're going to do it in zero knowledge, but it's going to be 5 orders of magnitude more expensive, or we're going to do it in FHE and it's 10 orders of magnitude more expensive, that just doesn't work for a lot of use cases. So there's point solutions that work, but overall, for the most of the computation that happens in the world, these networks don't yet work. However, the history of computing is we keep decreasing the cost structure. So eventually, a lot of these things, a lot of the applications of today can run in ZK and FHE, but that's kind of 2027, 2030, not today. And I do think that a lot of these are going to find strong early product market fit with specific Web3 oriented applications. I do think AI agents is a very strong one because crypto is the only thing that can give, not the only thing, but is the best poised thing to enable AI models that are able to like manage resources. And caveat, like that's quite dangerous. So be very careful about how you do that. But it's likely going to happen. I should like run a session on AI later in the next couple of days. Cool. I'll talk about dev environment network funding very quickly because I'm already going over time. So in terms of dev environment, we've talked in the past about lots of improvements that need to happen over time. We're all working towards them. There's really good dev connectivity gatherings, like Enters the Gathering and Field Dev Summit and so on. There's been a range of improvements across the year. NV23 and NV24. I think NV22 was also this year, if I'm mistaken. Maybe not. There's a broad community roadmap oriented around storage adoption, Web3 tools, and growth. There's a whole range of public goods teams that have launched over the year. We had RetroPGF round 1. We're in the middle of RetroPGF round 2. This is awesome as a way to get the network to pick the things that are important and fund them. And over time, we want to shift more of our allocation of capital to these kinds of tools so that you can decide what matters to fund. We've had teams and groups like Phil Builders that are now supporting devs building on Filecoin, the PL Dev Guild that has brought together a whole set of folks and has enabled them to work with core devs to contribute to protocols and level up. I think both of these programs are really strong potential for growth, meaning investing in both of these is a way to greatly increase the number of folks that can help with like critical components. So strongly encourage folks that are working on protocol development to work with PL Dev Guild, and folks that are have end user developer application things to work with Field Builders to do the DevRel side of things. We just had a Hacker House, which was I think really productive and a really useful format. We likely will repeat it. There's a lot of groups working on public goods, help direct public goods funding by participating in RetroPGF, grow the Filecoin economy so that ends up impacting folks better. One quick note on network funding. So this is what private funding looks like today. There's existing private funding mechanisms. So for startups, there's accelerators and VC. We keep working with a range of accelerators, so that pipeline is working just fine as in the past. There's a number of people in the room today that went through those accelerators, so starting those hackathons. Folks like Secured Finance and others. For SPs, there's some private equity funds, and this is lower in. I think this is like hurting more than other areas of capital. So this is an area where making specific improvements could be transformative to the network, meaning people launching PE-style funds that enable connecting broader pools of capital to the SP business. And there's the DeFi-CeFi landscape for individual investors, and those are awesome today relative to where we were 2 years ago. And so that used to be a big problem where we didn't have that through FVM, through protocols like Glyph and others. Through lots of groups came in to improve the overall structure here. So now there's capital there. So the things that are working are there's strong startups in the ecosystem, and those strong startups get funded. There's a strong builders funnel program, so you can go from idea to startup. Many Filecoin ecosystem startups have developed over this time frame, and there's lots of capital tied up in the ecosystem. We're talking about billions in scale in leasing, VC, and PE. But that capital isn't growing today, and part of that comes from Filecoin's performance as an individual asset relative to the rest of the crypto space. It doesn't have the shine of the shiny new thing, and so currently there's a lot of capital folks out there that just don't understand Filecoin very well, and their opportunity cost of investing in something else goes in some other direction. The opportunity there is that it enables people like you in this room to take advantage of that and create funds that end up doing that work. And so I've been working with a set of folks to do that. There's a number of folks working in this area of being able to create the right connector and infrastructure to connect larger pools of capital out there to be able to support SPs through PE and startups through VC. So what do we need next? More investors in all categories, better ways to find opportunities. So things like Phil VC or other structures. I think in the scale of a few $100 million to come into the ecosystem over time to fund startups and SPs. This is, by the way, par for the course. This is the scale of capital that is involved in the network already. And we need, I think something that qualitatively could help a lot is on-chain DeFi mechanisms for SP fundraising. I think SPs find it really difficult to fundraise through traditional means. And if there were DeFi-oriented structures to help form capital, that could be super, super valuable. This is tricky to do right, and part of the reason this hasn't emerged, it's a fairly difficult and complex thing to do regulatorily. But I think that there are really clear opportunities here on specific jurisdictions, specific ways of doing it, where you do most of the construction in DeFi, and then you have a regulatory domain where that applies. So in specific jurisdictions and specific platforms with KYC and so on, and KYC, AML, and all the traditional structure. So talking about public goods funding, today we have FF grants, PL grants, which are now PL FIF grants, and we have Phil Retro PGF. There's a few other grants out there, but these are the 3 largest mechanisms. The things that are working are some, but not all of the important projects get funded. We need to get it to all of the important projects get funded and get funded more. Right now, the funding scale is smaller than I think those projects need. A few expert funders can allocate proactively. So there's a few folks who are doing proactive grant programs, and there's about 50 plus network leaders along the network that can allocate retroactively. So using Phil Retro PGF. And today, we have easy ways for organizations to fund some specific things. So like sponsorships and so on, a lot of participants in the network can fund those specific things. What do we need next? We need more funding to go to PGF. We need higher impact and lower costs in that landscape, meaning we need to improve how our mechanisms run, and our mechanisms should be cheaper to run. Right now, RetroPGF has baked into it a way of measuring the amount of cost that goes into building the round itself, and we want to drive that cost lower over time. Think about how to leverage AI there. Could LLMs be good batch holders? I don't know. We need to enable network leaders to allocate proactively as well. So retroactive is one piece, but we also need now, I think, a proactive mechanism. We also need ways for organizations to fund public goods easily. Right now, organizations find it difficult to route exactly the funding. And so we need to kind of improve the landscape a little bit to make it much easier for participants that are on the network to fund public goods, especially new applications and L2s. So as an example, today, Optimism is one of the key L2s in Ethereum, and it is funding a huge fraction of the Ethereum public goods. Not even Optimism public goods, Ethereum public goods, because Optimism is part of Ethereum. Today, it would be great if we can create a capital structure where we can, through initial grants and then through initial startup capital, we can support a good environment for L2s and applications to develop. Many of the folks here that are building those L2s and applications have gotten funding from ecosystem-oriented funds, either through PL or other groups or grants from FF. And that kind of structure should come with some long-term orientation in the ecosystem of improving the ecosystem for themselves. And so creating an easy path for new networks that emerge to flow some amount of their public goods funding to the network itself, I think could be really, really valuable. So what this would look like is on-chain structures to accept funding from other networks. So imagine building a new token network, and you can allocate a small fraction of your supply to go and improve Filecoin in general directly on-chain, which I think could be pretty valuable. So this is kind of what it looks like today. I have a different version of this with some of those mechanisms mapped out that I'll talk about in the Phil PGF talk. All right, sorry, that was a lot. I went 10 minutes over. I'll take one question for this last section. No question. Okay, awesome. Thanks everybody. Oh yeah, over here.
Hi, this is Kenneth. You mentioned that to make use of Filecoin as a layer 1 abstract for the different computes in the architectural diagram earlier. So I'm curious, how interoperable will be the layer 2 and the layer 1 with regards to the runtime and all? Is there work to be done?
Yeah, and here layer 2 doesn't have the same context as, say, an Ethereum layer 2 where you have to do a roll-up in a specific super integrated way. In our model of the world, an L2 here doesn't necessarily have to be rooted in Filecoin for consensus. It's just an application that computes very close to Filecoin and has interconnectivity with the storage features of Filecoin and the economy of Filecoin. So the connectivity here means being able to do easy task processing, easy interconnectivity to SPs, and being able to understand what data they're storing to be able to run computation over that data. It probably means some software that interconnects easily with the other software in the Filecoin ecosystem. And so that's kind of what this roughly looks like. Right now, those, as I'm sort of pointing out, we lack good integrations here, and so this requires work. It's not currently the major, it's not a major focus for the people in this room, so I'm going to be pushing this less hard in this Field Dev Summit. But in 2025, I'm going to be pushing this harder. If you're individually interested in this, you can come find me during FDS and we can talk about it. But this is not where most people's priority should be. Most people's priority should be in PMF. All right, cool. That's a great question. Thank you. I will end here. Thank you very much.